So we'll make a start. I'm going to talk on the unusual topic, the lesser known topic of Philip K. Dick and the craft of writing. And so many people who apologise for Phil's writing, and I actually happen to think he's a very good writer, and I mean that in terms of the craft of writing. So many words have been devoted to Dick's novels, and comparatively little has been written about his short stories. Dick sometimes reworked themes from his short stories and extended them into novels. We know the mould of Yancey informed the penultimate truth. The Days of Perky Pat influenced the Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch. The Great Sea was adapted into Deus Irae, etc. However, their true worth is not in whether they became larger works, but their worth is actually intrinsic. There are two reasons why Dick switched from writing short stories and focused on novels. One was the purely economic, and born perhaps from necessity. He could earn much more money with a novel. Perhaps much is the word that shouldn't be there. He could earn more money, not much more money with a novel. Authors like Ray Bradbury had learned this and were selling collections as novels, even though they were really short story collections. Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles and The Illustrated Man are a case in point. Phil realised that it would be near impossible to make a living out of short story writing. This is how he related his change of direction to Paul Williams in 1974. The interview was later released, as you know, as the PKDS newsletter 9 and 10, which was actually just an audio cassette. And Phil said this: "In '54 I went to my first convention and they said, 'You ought to write novels. You'll never make it writing short stories.' They were right, you know. You kill yourself trying to live." So I said, "Oh, is that how you do it?" And they said, "Yeah, have a martini." And I said, "What's a martini?" Again, that's the writer at work, even speaking. Note Phil's dry sense of humour in pointing out his naivete. What's a martini? Devastatingly economic, as usual. The second obvious reason why Phil reworked some of his short stories into novels is that he wanted to revisit themes and explore them in greater depth. The novel would afford him more space to reflect on his ideas and extrapolate further. Any reader of the exegesis, which of course was never intended for publication, will know just how far Phil could go with hypothesis, deduction and cogitation. Fans often express a preference for the novels, believing that they house the most important material. Of course, when faced with the Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, Valis, A Scanner Darkly and Time Out of Joint, it's easy to see that they have a strong case. However, I don't want to play one source of treasure against another. I'd rather point to the fact that many of his short stories are every bit as good as these aforementioned novels. And to think otherwise is to impoverish the scope of our experience of Philip K. Dick. Indeed, some of his short stories are enhanced by their very economy. Like a beautiful haiku, they make their point neatly and then exit. I'm sorry, it's taking time to advance here. Sorry, just sticky keys on the laptop. They make their point neatly and then exit. As a great poet once indicated, some things are not enhanced by there being more. Philip Larkin in the poem Dockery and Son said, "Why did he think adding meant increase? To me it was dilution." Stories like Mr. Spaceship, The Electric Ant, and I Hope I Shall Arrive Soon work all the more powerfully because of their concentrated form. Dick manages to say so much in just a few pages, leaving us with ideas which expand and reverberate in the mind long after we have returned his books to their shelves. My abiding view, having been a Dick reader since the late 1970s, is that both the novels and the short stories are equally important. If that sounds shocking, I would suggest that you just haven't read the short stories closely enough. Furthermore, I'd point that the demarcation between Dick's important work and his lesser work doesn't coincide with the divide between his novels and his short stories. Both contain good and bad. Of all of his short stories, very quickly I would recommend The Little Movement, Beyond Lies the Wub, The Skull, Paycheck, The King of the Elves, Second Variety, Some Kinds of Life, The Commuter, A Present for Pat, Human Is, Adjustment Team, Imposter, Small Town, The Hanging Stranger, The Golden Man, A Father Thing, Exhibit, Service Call, Captive Market. You can see how I like them. Minority Report, The Days of Becky Pat, We Can Remember It For You Wholesale, Faith of Our Fathers, The Electric Ant, The Pre-Persons, I Hope I Shall Arrive Soon, and Ratvara's Case. Dick was a master of the short story form. I say this at a time when it is not the fashion for Dick fans to discuss his understanding of the craft, and dare I say it, his literary merit. I have heard many fans and scholars of Dick's work apologising for the quality of his writing. They hastily point to the richness of his ideas, as if to divert attention. However, I think that Philip K. Dick was not only a good writer, but a very good writer, who wrote with great skill. Sometimes the great art of a person's craft is concealed. We are too busy being transported by the meaning of their communication that we appropriately miss the means by which they have achieved this. In the case of Dick, it is often assumed that he was some kind of a hack writer whose only virtue was that he happened to have a few good ideas. Nothing could be further from the truth. Great artists are in the habit of making it look effortless, just as reality is in the habit of concealing itself. I would like to illustrate my argument with examples from his short story, Explorers We, which first appeared in the January 1959 issue of the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. Dave Hyde and Henry Wince, their great short story bibliography, Precious Artifacts 2, gives Explorers We 5 out of 5. And I concur, it's a very interesting story. So I'd like to illustrate my argument with examples from his short story, Explorers We. In referring to the content and craft of Explorers We, I shall of course be giving away its plot, so please head for them there hills if you feel very strongly about that. But I still think revisiting it will be interesting anyway. So we'll read much of it together as we explore Dick's art. The writer's first task is to engage the reader, to grab their attention and keep it. Openings are very important. With Shakespeare, I found that the opening of each play lays out the main underlying themes, often with great subtlety. For example, King Lear is a play concerned with the difference between representation and reality. If that isn't a Dickian theme, I don't know what is. And given that, it's also pointing out the difference between hollow words and sincere action. Thus the play opens with a king examining a map of his kingdom. We are reminded that the map is not the territory. It was actually Korzybski, who Doug quoted earlier, who coined that term, the map is not the territory, and it was appropriated much later by neuro-linguistic programmers, etc. So the map is not the territory. The king mistakes flattering words for real love. A representation is not itself reality, no matter how close it seems. There's a painting there by René Magritte. I think he's a real counterpart of Philip K. Dick, and I'd urge you all, which you are Dick fans, to have a look at René Magritte, the Belgian surrealist painter. And he painted this. It's an easel set up for somebody indoors painting a scene outdoors, and the landscape in the background coincides exactly and precisely with the easel that's set up. But of course the representation of the landscape is not the landscape, and then the artist is playing with us still, because the whole thing is a painting anyway. So you've got nested realities, again very Dickian. With the French existentialists, they tended to kickstart the reader with a hook. Albert Camus' brilliant The Outsider begins thus: Mother died today, or yesterday, maybe, I don't know. How could a person not remember when their mother died? We are shocked and hooked, we read on. Dick employs a similar device at the start of Explorers We. And I know it's a cardinal sin to put text on a PowerPoint presentation, but it is the text that we want to analyse, so it helps if it's there for you to see. This is how Explorers We begins. Golly, Parkhurst gasped, his red face tingling with excitement. Come here, you guys, look. They crowded round the vid screen. There she is, Barton said. His heart beat strangely. She sure looks good. Damn right she looks good, Leon agreed. Dick deliberately draws us in. He has used the word she 3 times in as many lines. Who can she be? Who is it that causes faces to redden and tingle with excitement? She must look stunning. And then, in the continuation of Leon's statement, we discover who she is. These are 6 astronauts returning from a failed mission to Mars, and this is their first sight of Earth. Dick uses defamiliarization, and he's led us to consider the attributes of a beautiful woman, only to then ascribe them to our own majestic planet. Their dialogue reveals that they thought they might be marooned on Mars indefinitely, until one of their colleagues managed to effect a repair. The small talk which ensues has the crew anticipating all the things they have missed. You know what I'm going to do first thing? I'm back, Parkhurst yelled. What? Go to Coney Island. Why? People I want to see again, lots of them, dumb, sweaty, noisy, ice cream, water, the ocean, beer bottles, milk cartons, paper napkins, and gals, Betsy said, eyes shining. Long time, 6 months. I'll go with you. We'll sit on the beach and watch the gals. I wonder what kind of bathing suits they've got now, Barton said. Maybe they don't wear any, Parkhurst cried. Hey, Merriweather shouted, I'm going to see my wife again. He was suddenly dazed. His voice sank to a whisper. My wife. I got a wife too, Stone said. He grinned. But I've been married a long time. Then he thought of Pat and Jean. A stabbing ache choked his windpipe. I bet they have grown. Grown? My kids, Stone said huskily. Notice how overcome the crew are when they recall their families. They are suddenly dazed, their voices sink to a whisper. They experience a stabbing ache, choking their windpipe, and their voices become husky with emotion. Dick is reinforcing the idea that these are plain Earth people, just like you and I. We recognize their likes and responsibilities as being natural. Their ordinariness is claimed in a line which draws no attention to itself. They looked at each other, 6 men, ragged, bearded, eyes bright and feverish. This apparently throwaway line slips in with beautiful stealth the idea that these are just 6 men. As a sentence, it would work perfectly well without the word 6 men. They looked at each other, ragged, bearded, eyes bright and feverish. But Dick slips that in with great stealth, reminding us that these are human beings. And that's perfect because he's setting up an imminent counterpoint. After a bumpy landing during which they're all thrown on the floor, one of them suffers a minor injury. Parkhurst got unsteadily to his feet. He caught hold of a safety rail. Blood dripped down his face from a cut over his eye. This further reinforces the just like us idea. In Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice, Shylock says, "If you prick us, do we not bleed?" to assert his humanness. Shylock is insisting that he is nothing but a mere human, and everything common to humans is common to him, as indeed are these astronauts, we are led to believe. As might well be the case after such a crash landing, others too are injured. "Give me a hand," Leon said. "My damn ankle's twisted or something." They got him up. Merriweather was unconscious. They revived him and got him to his feet. The vulnerability of the crew further establishes their human frailty. Next, the crew make small talk concerning where precisely they have landed, south of San Francisco. They speak enthusiastically of the cable cars, the Golden Gate Park and the Funhouse. All of this apparent preamble seems like a fairly ordinary narrative when it is first read. Indeed, it is intended not to draw attention to itself. But because I have highlighted its purpose, you will now expect its forthcoming antithesis. Once the crew open the hatch and emerge, they hear and see familiar things. "What's that sound?" Stone said, listening intently. "A train. It was coming along the distant track, black smoke pouring from its stack. A faint wind moved across the field, stirring the grass. Over to the right lay a town, houses and trees. A theatre marquee, a standard gas station, roadside stands, a motel. These are the things of Earth, and we are reassured. This is indeed their home and ours. This too is very important for the ensuing puzzle which Dick is setting up." As they start walking towards the nearest town, Parkhurst starts fantasizing about the royal reception they will probably receive. Maybe they'll give us a free eats. Hell, champagne. His chest swelled under his tattered uniform. "Returning heroes, keys to the town, a parade, military band, floats with dames." As they walk towards town, they notice some kids watching them. As they approach, the crew get an unusual and unwelcome reaction. The kids stared at them, wide-eyed, eyes wide. "What's wrong?" Leon muttered. "Our beards, we look pretty bad." Stone cupped his hands. "Don't be scared. We're back from Mars. The rocket flight 2 years ago, remember? A year ago last October." The kids stared, white-faced, suddenly, then turned and fled. They ran frantically toward the town. The 6 men watched them go. "What the hell?" Parkhurst muttered, dazed. "What's the matter?" "Our beards," Stone repeated uneasily. "Something's wrong," Barton said, shakily. He began to tremble. "There's something terribly wrong." This is the first confirmation the reader gets that things are not what they seem. And Dick has set it up beautifully, persuading us through skillful writing that these are Earthmen and that this is the Earth we know and love. Without these two givens firmly in place, the story would hold no tension or mystery. Only with proper thesis can there be antithesis. Did you notice Dick's subtle reuse of the term 6 men? The crew have passed off the children's reaction as being on account of their bedraggled and bearded appearance. However, they meet others and get a similar reaction. A youth on a bicycle fled at their approach. Some railroad workers repairing the train track threw down their shovels and ran yelling. Normally, the 6 men watched them go. "What is it?" Parkhurst muttered. As the crew continued, they reached the town of Burlingame. Dick takes a moment to further reinforce the prosaic ordinariness of the town. They look down a street, hotels and cafes, parked cars, gas stations, dime stores. A small suburban town, shoppers on the sidewalks, cars moving slowly. More people run from them. A gas station attendant, men and women from their stores all scatter wildly until the streets are deserted. As they continue their journey, Dick is careful in the words he chooses. He doesn't say they walk down the main street dazed and silent, which would be perfectly legitimate. He says, the 6 men walk down the main street dazed and silent. I'm trying to reveal the craft that's embedded in the art of the way Dick is working here. On an ordinary read-through, we probably wouldn't notice that once again Dick is subliminally reminding us that these are men, 6 men. It is a property of great craft that for the most part it is invisible, as we've said. It should be. Great craft is in service to the art. The art is visible, but the craft ought to be transparent. This story only works if the returning crew are obviously real people and Earth and its inhabitants are also validated as real, and Dick has been at pains to subtly emphasise the efficacy of both. Dick then takes a moment to strengthen our belief in the humanity of the crew, knowing this will maximise the impact of the imminent clash of realities. Stone said nothing. His mind was blank, numb. He felt tired. He sat down on the curb and rested, getting his breath. The others stood around him. My ankle, Leon said. He leaned against the stop sign, lips twisting with pain. Hurts like hell. Captain, Barton said, what's the matter with them? I don't know, Stone said. He felt in his ragged pocket for a cigarette. Thus they have ankles which can get sprained, lips which can twist, and cravings just like us. As they walk down the street, frightened faces peer out from windows and shutters are pulled down. They find a cafe which has been deserted, but which still has a hamburger cooking and a glass coffee pot boiling on the burner. With no one to serve them, they decide to leave. All except Captain Stone. Once outside, they are met by the FBI, who turn up in 2 black sedans. I'm Scanlon, said FBI. Sorry, I'm Scanlon, one said, FBI. An older man with iron grey hair, his voice was clipped and frigid. He studied the 5 of them intently. Where's the other? Captain Stone. In there. Barton pointed to the cafe. Note feels subtle and elliptical, the other. Not the other man. We're not talking 6 men anymore. We're talking about the other. Not even the other guy. The language used also reminds us of the machine world, of utility and function, of metal, of the grey, lifeless world which lacks colour. He speaks only the words necessary, and there is an icy coldness. One of the crew, Barton, retrieves the captain from the cafe. Obviously, FBI man Scanlon confirms that they have all of them now. The crew are distressed, but the FBI are resolute. "Wait," Barton cried thickly, his head spun. What's happening?" "What is it?" Parkhurst demanded deprecatorily. Tears rolled down his face, streaking his cheeks. "Will you tell us, for God's sake?" The FBI men had weapons. They got them out. Notice Dick's brilliant evocation of the cold machine brain in the juxtaposition of those last few lines. The pleading people and the FBI men had weapons. They got them out. Notice also that the line could have said, "The FBI men got their weapons out," which would not have been as strong. Instead, Dick uses two very short clipped sentences which serve to show the FBI's response as something clinical, cold, procedural. A follows B. Back to the story. Vecchi backed away, his hands up. "Please," he wailed. "What have we done? What's happening?" Sudden hope flickered in Leon's breast. They don't know who we are. They think we're commies." He addressed Scanlon. "We're the Earth-Mars expedition. My name is Leon, remember? A year ago, last October, we're back. We're back from Mars." His voice trailed off. The weapons were coming up. Nozzles, hoses and tanks. "We're back," Merriweather croaked. "We're the Earth-Mars expedition, come back." Dick has us identifying strongly with the confused and defenseless crew. Then he gives us the opposing perspective, which in true Dick fashion undermines the scenario as we understood it. It is Scanlon's response which gives us this jolt. Scanlon's face was expressionless. "That sounds fine," he said coldly. "Only the ship crashed and blew up when it reached Mars. None of the crew survived. We know because we sent up a robot scavenger team and brought back the corpses, 6 of them." Note Scanlon's face was expressionless. He speaks coldly. The FBI men fired. Blazing napalm sprayed towards the 6 bearded figures. They returned and then the flames touched them. The FBI men saw the figures ignite and then the sight was cut off. They could no longer see the 6 figures thrashing about, but they could hear them. It was not something they enjoyed hearing, but they remained waiting and watching. Is this a demonstration of the non-empathic android mind which chillingly dispatches other beings with cold impersonality? Or is this the rational act of a world protecting itself from alien invasion? If it were the latter, then why the use of flamethrowers and not a quicker, less painful form of execution? Dick has given us the humanity of the crew, then the coldness of the FBI, and now to confound our loyalties, he has just given the FBI a credible rationale. Nevertheless, Scanlon's disrespect for the newly dead crew is evident. Scanlon kicked at the charred fragments with his foot. "Not easy to be sure," he said. "Probably only 5 here, but I didn't see any of them get away. They didn't have time." At the pressure of his foot, a section of ash broke away. It fell into particles that steamed and bubbled. What a great piece of writing to show the utter annihilation of a living being. As people start to come out from doorways, a boy shouts something which gives us our first handle on how these returning crew have been perceived in the wider media. "They got him," a boy shouted excitedly. "They got the outer space spies." The idea of a child feeling such glee and triumph over 6 sentient beings being killed by flamethrower reveals the shocking inhumanity of these Earth people. Scanlon's dialogue with the FBI colleague Wilkes gives us another startling piece of the puzzle. "What's this, the 22nd time?" Scanlon said. 21st? Every couple of months, the same names, same men. I won't tell you that you'll get used to it, but at least it won't surprise you. These are most likely Martian impersonators and not who they say they are. However, Dick is not a peddler of easy solutions, certainties or mono-perceptions. We've been privy to something the FBI agents were not namely the crew's in-flight conversation. These were not mere impersonators. These were individuals who actually believed they were who they said they were. These are people, in inverted commas, who were genuinely celebrating their return and who each had precious memories of Earth. Dick pits these two opposing viewpoints against one another. FBI agent Wilkes expresses a dilemma which Scanlon is not willing to contemplate. I don't see any difference between them and us, Wilkes said, speaking distinctly. It was like burning up 6 human beings. Great writers draw from their own experiences, and the admonition to write what you know might be better worded as write what you have experienced, or even write what you can imagine experiencing. And here is Phil relating something he experienced. There's a quote from Phil in an interview. I had seen in the world what the Buddhists saw: pointless suffering. Suffering of animals, suffering of people, suffering of nations. I remember during World War II, when I was a kid, seeing newsreel film in the theatre of a Japanese soldier who had been hit with a flamethrower by the Americans. He was burning to death and running, burning and running. And I had seen a kid burn up at camp when I was in primary school, and the audience seeing this Japanese soldier burning to death and running from this flaming torch cheered and laughed. And I was dazed with horror at the sight of the man on the screen and the audience's reaction, and I thought something is terribly wrong. It seems highly likely that this powerful incident informed the writing of Explorers We. And by the way, those images I just showed you are from the Pathé News that was shown in cinemas, so they might actually be some of the exact images that Phil saw. You can actually find them on YouTube. I'm not a fan of looking for things like that on YouTube, because you end up getting other things that they think you may like, and I certainly don't like them. But for the research, they are the actual ones. You've even got the Pathé News logo in the top right hand corner there. Back to the narrative. Although Scanlon insists that they only look like 6 human beings, Wilkes thinks there ought to be a better way of dealing with them than flamethrower. But, he gestured, isn't there anything else we can do with them? Scanlon is adamant. These were only imitation people. One of the bureau men informed Scanlon that there were only 5 charred bodies in the ashes. He tells Wilkes. One got away. They think they saw him. He's crippled and not moving fast. The rest of us are going after him. You stay here. Keep your eyes open. This hunting down something crippled and not moving fast reminds me of another incident that Phil related in the same Charles Platt interview. Phil said this: when I was in my 30s and living in the country, I had to kill a rat that had gotten into the children's bedroom. Rats are hard to kill. I set a trap for it, and in the night it got into the trap, and the next morning when I got up, it heard me coming and it screamed. I took the trap out with a pitchfork and sprung the trap and let the rat go out in the pasture, and it came out of the trap and its neck was broken. I took the pitchfork and drove the tines into the rat, and it still didn't die. Here was this rat. It had tried only to come in and get food. It was poisoned, its neck was broken, and it was still alive. At that point, I simply went crazy with horror. I ran in and filled a tub of water and drowned it, and I buried it, and took the St. Christopher medal that I wore and buried that with the rat. And the soul of that rat I carry on me from then on as a question and as a problem about the condition of living creatures on this world. I could not exorcise the spirit of that rat which had died so horribly. Even in 1974, I was still remembering that rat screaming. Returning to Explorers We, Wilkes ponders his position and considers alternative responses to non-human life forms. Mimicry. Everybody terrified, but had anybody really tried to make contact? Throughout the story, Dick has fortified these opposing perceptions beautifully. On the one hand, these are invaders from Mars, Scanlon has explained this. They mimic those who died in a failed mission. Are they perhaps responsible for the original crew's death? And on the other hand, these are sentient beings with humanity, beings who might not know what they are. They seem to believe they were the actual crew. They might indeed be the actual crew who have found a way to inhabit other life forms, and they appear to be peaceful. The scene is set. Dick now stacks the odds against the helpless lone individual. Indeed, this feels very much like the individual versus the state. 2 policemen appeared, herding people back out of the way. A third black Dodge, loaded with bureau men, moved along at the curb, stopped, and the men got out. Notice these are forces which herd people. They come in black, and their vehicles are loaded with bureau men. Authority, darkness, force. One of the bureau men checks that Wilkes knows how to kill it if he sees it. Wilkes answers in the affirmative, but he is still pondering what his response would be. If it was up to me, Wilkes asked himself, what would I do? Try to find out what they want? Anything that looks so human, behaves in such a human way, must feel human, and if they, whatever they are, feel human, might they not become human in time? It is Wilkes who first spots the crew member who got away, and thus he is caught in a moral dilemma. At the edge of the crowd of people, an individual shape detached itself and moved towards him. Uncertainly, the shape halted, shook its head, staggered and caught itself, and then assumed a stance like that of the people near it. Wilkes recognized it because he had been trained to over a period of months. It had gotten different clothes, a pair of slacks, a shirt, but it had buttoned the shirt wrong and one of its feet was bare. Evidently it did not understand the shoes, or he thought maybe it was too dazed and injured. As it approached him, Wilkes raised his pistol and took aim at its stomach. They had been taught to fire there. He had fired on the practice range at chart after chart, right in the midsection, bisected like a bug. On its face, the expression of suffering and bewilderment deepened as it saw him prepare to fire. It halted, facing him, making no move to escape. Now Wilkes realized that it had been severely burned. Probably it would not survive in any case. I have to, he said. It stared at him, and then it opened its mouth and started to say something. He fired. Before it could speak, it had died. Wilkes got out as it pitched over and lay beside the car. I did wrong, he thought to himself, as he stood looking down at it. I shot it because I was afraid. But I had to, even if it was wrong. It came here to infiltrate us, imitating us so we won't recognize it. That's what we're told. We have to believe that they're plotting against us, are inhuman, and will never be more than that. The desperation of the creature, the inept attempt at disguise, the suffering and bewilderment at having to die, all of these are contrasted with Wilkes' rationalization that he had to. He was just following orders. We might contemplate which of the two beings is truly human. I think the answer will be based more on empathy than biology. Wilkes wants to console himself that for better or worse, it's all finished with. Thank God, he thought, it's over. And then he remembered it wasn't. In the story, another returning spaceship has a rocky landing, and once again, a Captain Stone, Parkhurst, Barton, et al. Emerge bruised and shaken, but excited and pleased to be safely home. And thus the story ends, anticipating an endless cycle of killing. The humans in this story respond immediately to new life forms by incinerating them. Thus the humans lack humanity, and the invaders behave with humanity. We are exploring one of Dick's most persistent themes: what is human? In the short story Human Is, a woman finds her husband so emotionally cold that in a police lineup she deliberately misidentifies a friendly android as her real husband, because she prefers an android with humanity than a human with no empathy. That word again, empathy. And what happens to Deckard in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? What is Deckard's work doing to him? Who are the androids and who are the humans? We would be wise to reflect on our fixed categories. In King Lear, Shakespeare asked similar questions regarding who is who. In Act 4, Scene 6 of King Lear, the king is said to be mad. He's actually just had a nervous breakdown because of a whole pile of emotional upset. And he meets a guy who's been blinded, deliberately blinded. And the words they speak to each other are amongst the most haunting, I think, in all of literature. Words about injustice and fairness and law and governance. But the king says this to the blind man: "A man may see how this world goes with no eyes. Look with thine ears. See how yon justice rails upon yon simple feet. Hark in thine ear. Change places and handy-dandy. Which is the justice and which is the thief?" Handy-dandy is that game people play. You know, they do that and ask you which hand something's in, put the hand behind their back, and then they bring them out, and you have to guess which hand contains the thing. That's handy-dandy. And Lear's saying, which is the justice and which is the thief? And you can look at our own politicians to ponder that. That Explorers We remains unresolved is to Dick's great credit, and I'm summing up now. It resonates in the mind long after it's been read. We are left with questions rather than answers, and we are invited to explore issues rather than to cease questioning by holding glib certainties. Explorers we become. In many ways, the story is a puzzle which cannot be settled. Indeed, it is Dick's intention, no doubt, to unsettle us. Each side apparently believes itself to be authentic and true. Each view validates the opposing view. I mentioned the Belgian surrealist, René Magritte. He once found a visual analogue for this puzzle in his painting, The Telescope. I'm sorry, that was King Lear. Looking at this image, we might conclude A, that the windows have a painted sky on their surface, or we might conclude that these windows are see-through or hollow. One thing I just want to point out, and I'm height challenged, but I think I can do this, is this window suggests maybe it's just glass and we're seeing outside, but then this challenges that immediately. Then this window adds to the conundrum. If you look at the top corner here, the top corner here looks see-through, and surely if it was open there, because we can see the frame behind and through the window, surely if that was open, then this should be black as well. And so it can't ultimately be resolved. And Dick's Explorers We is very similar in that it cannot be fully resolved. It's paradoxical, like Explorers We, and it's beautifully balanced. It operates the way it does in every well-designed paradox. A good paradox that would illustrate that was, imagine a country where those condemned to die are allowed to decide whether they'll be hanged or beheaded. And they make their choice by making a statement. If their statement proves false, then they will be hanged. And if their statement proves true, then they will be beheaded. A condemned man, when asked for his statement, said cleverly, "I shall be hanged." And if they do hang him, then his statement was true and he should have been beheaded. And if they behead him, then his statement was false and he should have been hanged. Likewise, Explorers We does not allow us an answer. Had the returning crew been shown as less human, and this is credit to Dick's writing, or the FBI and Earth people more humane, then a conclusion would have been possible. It is to Dick's credit that he has balanced these opposing forces so well that one's allegiance cannot be fully resolved. Our loyalties are confounded. Dick has placed us in a superposition between two mutually exclusive realities. Like a Zen koan, this story holds us in contemplation. We bathe in its questions rather than race towards any glib answers. Dick has achieved this through both the structure of his writing and his careful choices of words and their connotations. He revelled in the very process of writing, and he crafted his stories until they were worked. In a letter to a fellow American author, James McKimmey, Dick said, "A good story," remember this is Dick talking, "is a good story. It, like math, is a self-contained world. It validates itself. You don't have to look outside to find out if it's so. The impact of good writing is the test. Political opinions come and go, but once you do a good yarn, it's a living thing. And if you want confirmation of how much Dick put into his writing, here's another extract of a letter also to James McKinney. Dick said this: "After I write a really successful story, I always say to myself, by God, now I can die happy. The process of life goes on. I change, the world changes, new combinations arise, and the old ones are lost. But here on this handful of paper is one of these combinations, my reactions and responses, the sum of my personality and character as it interacts with a particular idea or experience. The idea never came to me before, it'll never come to me again, but look man, here it is." The field of science fiction is rife with stories of alien invaders versus humans, but in typical Dick fashion, he has made the aliens very human and the humans very inhumane. Concepts like us and them are found to be bankrupt. What matters is not what we are, but what we are becoming. And what matters most of all is empathy, agape, caritas, love. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Great job.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry the reading wasn't great at times. I couldn't quite see the words in it, didn't like it, so I apologise for that. Thank you.